Hello and welcome. Ukraine's military is fearing a second offensive in the direction of Kiev. This and more in this situation report. Ukraine's military command is expecting that Russia is pushing to achieve a temporary ceasefire to help Russia reorganize and to gain strength. Russia, on the other hand, while they are aiming to get a ceasefire, they are still aiming for the maximum goals. That means complete demilitarization, the change of government, and the annexation of massive swaths of Ukrainian territory. Zaluzhny, the supreme commander of the Ukrainian armed forces, is expecting a new Russian offensive starting somewhere between January and March. He says in worst case it's starting in January already. In best case it's starting in March. But he expects it to come really soon. He also says it's quite possible that it is going to be accompanied by a mechanized advance in the direction of Kiev itself. Zaluzhny said in total 200,000 additional troops could be used in those offensives that could start within 15 to 30 days. Those would be more or less the rest of the mobilized soldiers that have not been deployed yet, at least if we believe Putin. And some of them might already be fresh recruits that have been drafted in November 2022 that are currently in basic training. Russia is sending more and more troops towards Belarus. But right now they are concentrating on the training grounds within Belarus, so it might well be possible that the troops there are only there to use Belarusian training grounds as the Russian ones are overflowing, and they might use Belarusian trainers to help them train to increase the volume of soldiers that Russia can generate. But they are increasing the number of Russian troops steadily inside of Belarus. Right now, they are mostly in the training grounds, as I already said. As of now, there is no offensive positioning visible, so there might not be an invasion at all, but we will have to monitor the situation over the coming weeks and months, because as of now, as said, the troop concentration is growing. There is no sign of a current impeding invasion, but Ukraine is fearing that a second attempt to take Kiev might well be possible. The prospects of success in this regard should be fairly low. Even though Russia can generate massive amounts of additional troops now, those troops in general are far less well equipped than those that invaded in February. They are less trained than those who invaded in February. They should have less morale, and they are facing an opponent that is better trained, better equipped, has a higher morale, and is better prepared in every regards, because the fortifications that were built around Kiev and around the border either didn't exist when the Russian invasion happened, or they were massively extended and improved since then. So the likelihood of Russia successfully taking Kiev is not the greatest, even though it's obviously far too soon to say it's impossible at all. It just doesn't seem to be too likely should the Russians invade from Belarus and from the north again towards Kiev, that they achieve their goal this time. So Zaluzhny is saying, though, that he doesn't have any doubts that they will try another attempt on Kiev, simply by the fact that they have not changed anything about their overall goals yet. So the likelihood of them giving in and not taking the opportunity to end this at any time soon indicates that another attempt on Kiev is going to happen. The only question is when. On Monday, there's going to be a meeting between Putin and Lukashenko. Its official topic is about the union negotiations. Belarus and Russia are negotiating for roughly 2 decades about a union state federation, which would unite the two countries in some way or the other. So both give up some sovereignty, and there has actually the story that Lukashenko initially hoped that this way he might be able to rule over Russia from Belarus. There is going to be an additional meeting in this regard, and obviously the focus this time will likely be in the regards of Ukraine. Putin obviously wants to achieve some success, some progress in the regard of the Union state. He wants to take increasing control over Belarus, including its military, especially in the war right now. But it is to be expected that Lukashenko will try his best to avoid that, to prevent losing power and losing sovereignty of the Belarusian nation. He insists that Belarus is independent, that it's its own people, that there is no haste to do the union state, while he still refuses to back down from the union state negotiations. Right now, we can expect that Putin will also put up pressure for a renewed pressure that Belarus joins the invasion of Ukraine with its armed forces, not just by providing its territory, but whether they are going to be successful there is still highly in doubt, as the Belarusian military neither shows any preparations for that, nor does it seem capable of adding serious additional combat power, nor does it seem to have the morale, nor does it seem to have the support from the general population in any military operation in this regard. On the 16th of December, that is yesterday, there was another big attack on Ukrainian infrastructure. In this regard, there have been, according to Solushny, the Russian side used 76 cruise missiles. Ukraine claims they have shot down 60 of those, so 16 managed to hit Ukrainian objects. Not all of it seems to have been objects of high value. There's some report about hits in civilian buildings, in housing buildings, even though I can't fully confirm that. According to Solushny, 72 of them were KH-101, KH-22, and Caliber, and 4 were KH-59 and KH-31P. So the KH-101 is a long-range cruise missile with 400 kilogram payloads. The KH-22 that was used is an anti-ship missile that is being used against land targets. It's originally fairly old and should have a very low hit ratio. It has a range of 600 kilometers, but it has 1,000 kilogram of payload, so it's a fairly big missile that, if it hits somewhere close, should do serious damage. Caliber itself is a very long-range cruise missile too. There are different versions, very short ones. The Russians are still currently developing one with several thousand kilometers of range. Usually they're being fired from either the Caspian Sea or the Black Sea, and they carry a payload of 400 to 500 kilos. The 4 other missiles that were sent are kind of interesting because some of them are KH-59 according to Solushny. That is not really special in any ways. It's 200 kilometers or more range, can be used from regular fighter planes, so it doesn't have to be fired from bombers, and it has a warhead of 320 kilometers, but some of those 4 were KH-31P. That's an anti-radiation missile. You can more or less compare it to the HARM missile, so it was meant to attack Ukrainian air defense system. It has a range of 70 kilometers, that specific version, and Solushny mentioned KH-31P, so this is a 70 kilometer range, which was likely started from a Sukhoi 35 or something similar. Solushny was saying among the 40 cruise missiles that were flying towards Kiev, 37 were shot down. On the Eastern Front, we have, along the whole front line, I can already summarize, the developments aren't that massive. Nothing has changed much in this regard from the past situation reports, so I keep it brief to focus on things where we actually have something new to report. Obviously, artillery fire along the whole front line. Ukrainians are doing strikes deep into Russian-held territory with HIMARS. Russians try to fire back either with drones or with long-range artillery, or with S-300 surface-to-air missiles that they use in ground-to-ground mission. But when it comes to the eastern frontier north of the Sievierski Donetsk, we have heavy fighting along the whole front line. We have reports about both sides attacking, so it's not that one side is just defending. Both are trying to do offensives and counteroffensives in this regard. But regardless of the fighting, there's hardly anything to be reported. I don't have any confirmed change of territory. The only thing I even have claimed is that Ukraine is saying they gained 1.5 kilometer close to Dibrova. So this is Dibrova, close to Crimean. Where those 1.5 were that they claim, I cannot confirm in which direction, nor can I confirm that they actually did gain 1.5 kilometer. South of the Siversky Donetsk, it's not that much different. We have the heavy attacks on Bilohorivka and then south, more or less, till Marinka. The attacks are along the whole front line, massive attacks. The Russians are trying to force their way through. Heavy losses are occurring on both sides, but here nothing has changed from the past in the regard that the Russians do make advances, but to a fairly small degree, so they gain a part of a town here and there every week or so. This time they seem to have taken Yakovlivka. We have image proof that they are in the town, that they have entered the town. The only thing I cannot confirm is that they have conquered it by 100% as they have claimed, but they have definitely made an advance here in Yakovlivka. Further south, we have smaller reports at Ozarianivka being reported. If I remember correctly, that was here. Yes. So you see Bakhmut here. Ozarianivka is south here. There's also some image proof of the Russians having advanced in this direction. Other than that, obviously heavy attacks on Bakhmut itself, but also north in the direction of Soledar, Pithorodne, and south where the Russians try to start an encirclement of Bilohorivka while other parts of their forces run headlong into the Ukrainian defenses in Bakhmut. But overall, not much has changed. No strategic change, even though the Russians are advancing bit by bit in small areas now and then, but they keep advancing. No need to deny that. Around Avdiivka, also heavy fighting. This time, no proof whatsoever that anything has changed here, and the Russians are claiming they defeated a counterattack on Solotke or in the direction of Solotke. So according to that, the Ukrainians were supposedly attacking down here along the front line. Unfortunately, I can't use the highlighter. As you can see, as soon as I click, it sticks here. I don't know, there's some software trouble right now, so I please excuse that I'm not capable of doing the mouse highlight in this video properly. When we come to the southern front, we have the reports of shooting of each side, bombarding each other, but as said, nothing of strategic importance here, nothing too massive here. We have reports that the Russians are establishing minefields along the whole front line here, but also along the coastline of the Kherson province. And what's interesting is we have a Facebook report by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, and they are saying, in addition, the work of Russian mobile crematorium in the city of Tomak is celebrated, which means I guess it's continuing. I might have missed something here, but the mobile crematorium is one of the stories that is accompanying us from the beginning of the war. Like we had the story initially that the Russians were invading with 40,000 body bags, planning to obviously not use them on their own soldiers, but on Ukrainian civilians. There are some stories like this being repeated again and again by the Ukrainian side, and several times I have tried to find any visual proof, any proof that holds up to source criticism when it comes to the mobile crematoriums, and I have not found anything. So supposedly they are well camouflaged, so you can't identify them, and a tube that is gas fired that creates high heat as an oven probably isn't that difficult to construct and probably can be hidden in some kind of shipping container. But I want to set up here that this is one of the stories that is being told by the Ukrainian side since the beginning of the war, and I was unable to confirm it whatsoever. That doesn't negate any war crimes by the Russians, because I always have some part of the audience here who misunderstands the attempt to stick with the facts by they mistake this with denying Russian war crimes or anything like this. No, not at all. That's not at all going in this direction. I'm just saying that in several attempts to find any proof for the mobile crematoriums, I have not found any proof whatsoever that they actually do exist. That doesn't mean they don't exist. That just means that I was unable to prove their existence. So we should have some should be somewhat cautious in this regard, because it's still a war where both sides still have an intention to shape the informational battlefield, to shape the public opinion. And if the Western world believes the Russians are committing even more war crimes, I mean, they have proven to commit a lot already. It's not really necessary to prove more in my book. From torture chambers to systematic killings to mutilation of prisoners of war, all of this is proven, while Ukrainian side has committed some war crimes too, far less in extent, but still, as said, I try to stick to the facts. This is not meant to be a propaganda channel for the Ukrainian side, even though my sympathies are clearly on this side in this war. I try to stick to the facts as far as I can. So when it comes to this, I cannot see any proof for the crematoriums in Tokmak, but generally the information is not much is changing in this regard. So the Russians are reinforcing, both sides exchange artillery fire, Russians are creating defensive positions. That's more or less it. On the Crimea, we have one interesting thing. The Russians are continuing their work along the coastline of establishing fortifications and trenches. So we're not just talking about trenches, we're talking about the establishment of bunkers along the coastline, as well as minefields. So the Russian side seems to be taking it serious, that there is, at least in the midterm, a serious threat for a Ukrainian invasion that justifies using the resources. And while you could say you can use locals to dig some trenches, you can't use the mines you use here. You could use somewhere else. The fortifications you built, the concrete, you might be able to use somewhere else as well. This means that the Russian actually show how effective the Ukrainian suppression of the Russian Black Sea Fleet has been, because it would be a godsend present by the Ukrainians to do an invasion on the Crimea, and then having the Black Sea cut off this invasion, which would destroy it and force them into either being destroyed or into imprisonment, into becoming prisoners of war. Whereas if the Black Sea Fleet can't interdict any invasion and can't interdict ongoing supply of that invasion, then it suddenly becomes a serious threat. So the Russian side seriously believes that despite all the distances, even here, like we had fortifications here, and if we can see, this is 60 kilometers, it shows how the Russians take the Ukrainian abilities to interdict their sorties, their missions out of Sevastopol, of the Black Sea Fleet, serious. Obviously, Ukrainian side not only has its own anti-ship cruise missiles, but it also received a variety of Western anti-ship missiles, and they still have their suicide seaborne drones that they intend to ram into ships. In this regard, I think it's kind of interesting when it comes to the fortification, because it shows us how the Russians, you could even say, are afraid of a potential Ukrainian amphibious invasion. And here we have something interesting. We have satellite pictures of massive Russian troop concentration, which is here in Medvedivka. Let me see, Medvedivka should be somewhere, whatever. Not really that important. It's up here, more or less. So yeah, here it is. This is interesting because not only is it out of the range of HIMARS, when we see here, Medvedivka to this is out of the range of HIMARS, but it's actually in a fairly central position when it comes to reinforcing either Dnipro or the coastline here, or Zaporizhzhia. So what we can see here might actually be the massive concentration of Russian reserves that are being pulled back so they can't be attacked with HIMARS. The troop concentration can't be endangered, but at the same time, they are just 2 hours full speed driving away from potential front lines, so they are ready to push back any coming Ukrainian offensive. Those would be the reserves here that I talked about when we were talking in the past about the Russians, for instance, more or less thinning out their lines along the Dnipro, to that they will likely create reserve forces in the back to then push into a potential serious Ukrainian amphibious invasion. We have informations about partisans. In Berdyansk, there was an attack on a transformer station. 10,000 people were without electricity, and it took out a part of Berdyansk where there's a high concentration of Russian barracks or like where a lot of Russian forces are housed. And the local governor even said the attack proves that the attackers must have some military background. It's just what he said. I don't really. I can't judge it as I have not seen how sophisticated the attack by itself has been, whether that would mean anything or not. So we still have partisan activity in the background. Now we come to the mobilization. Again, here I could repeat myself, people complaining about bad training, bad leadership, bad equipment, bad supply, etc. I'm going and parents complaining that the wrong persons are being called up, parents complaining that their kids are students that were meant to fight for 6 months and now their contract is prolonged until the end of the war and things like this, but nothing massively changing here. A little more importance is that Russia is obviously suffering serious problems when it comes to their officers. There are now reports that Russia is increasingly pulling officers from the reserve into the armed forces, and they're mobilizing officers that are no longer part of the armed forces by calling them up to fill up the gaps that they have suffered through the high losses among the officers. There's also now reports that the Russians are changing the way how they use the mobilized personnel. Initially, they were using them in units where they were put together. That has proven to be disastrous. The combat efficiency of a unit made up only from mobilized soldiers is extremely low. So the indications are now showing that Russia is increasingly using mobilized personnel together in units with combat veterans to basically fill up those units and let the mobilized personnel benefit from the experience of the survivors from the first 10 months of this war. And in St. Petersburg, we have the next chapter of the fight between Prigozhin and the city of St. Petersburg. Prigozhin wanted to bury a Wagner mercenary, and the city refused to bury it on a heroes cemetery, more or less for soldiers fighting for Russia that have fallen. They say the Wagner mercenary was not part of the armed forces, and obviously some people are, including Prigozhin, are outraged over this because they said he fought for Russia, so he should deserve the same honor in death as regular armed forces. When it comes to the political sphere, we have some more informations. The Financial Times has unnamed sources, according to which the head of the central bank, Elvira Nabiulina, and the head of Sberbank, German Gref, had written a 39-page document prior to the war, warning Putin of the potential long-duration damages that acknowledging the independence of the two so-called People's Republic would cause. So Luhansk and Donetsk here. Both met Putin, and in a personal talk, they said that Western sanction could throw back Russia by decades. But if this is true, and obviously I can't prove any of this, this would show that Putin, despite warnings, has decided to go even a more radical way, as said, like they expected that even the acknowledgement of the independence of the so-called People's Republic would already cause massive damage, but he decided to go all in to start a full-blown war. Now, it would be obviously interesting if there are some memos from the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as well when it comes to the potential problems that might be caused with an invasion of Ukraine, or with just an acknowledgement or the declaration that the independence of the two so-called People's Republics are respected. But we might have to wait for that, or maybe they were never published. At least of now, we don't know. Still, though, the central bank recently said the production capacity of Russia is limited when it comes to the increase of the potential increase of production, because the labor market is already suffering massive shortages because of the mobilization. And what they didn't mention, obviously, because a lot of people, there's a talk of 700,000 just having left after the mobilization, and several 100,000 have left after the beginning of the war as well. All of those are also lacking, also missing in the labor market. And according to this, Russia will have trouble increasing the production of military goods as they are simply lacking personnel. That might be they might be able to change this by switching to actual war production, closing down factories in non-military areas. But then obviously the hardship for the population would be much bigger, and it would be much harder to hide from the results of the war and the problems that are being caused by the war to the general in regards to the general population if you close down the production of civilian goods in this regard. In the Duma, the Russian parliament, they started the first reading of a new law that would actually allow local authorities to end the prosecution of crimes that are committed in the 3 new territories, which means the 3 new annexed oblasts, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, if those crimes have been committed to further the goals of Russia, or basically if they have been committed in the furthering the interests of Russia. And that would mean that local authorities could decide that this murder and that rape and that pillaging is not a crime, even though it is punishable by Russian law, because it has been done in the interest of the Russian Federation. That obviously, as I said when we talked about that draft for the first time a couple of situation reports back, that would obviously mean that Russia would not have to prosecute any war criminals that are being identified, as the crimes have been committed inside of those areas here. And the interesting part is too that there is no limit for this law, so it's not that it's for 5 years or something. Right now, should the law become in effect, which seems likely, then it would last until it's specifically abolished afterwards, which would mean that war criminals might get decades of protection following this. That's it already for now. As said, not too much happening. The situation is more or less probably more interesting what's happening behind the scenes, but I hope it was still interesting for you. If it was, then please remember, this channel is only possible because of the support from viewers like you. So thank you very much to everyone already supporting the channel. If you want to support as well, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting. And if you like this video, I would very appreciate if you put a thumbs up. If you leave your comments, do you think the Russians can actually invade again from the north? Do you think they could take Kiev this time, especially if they now have potentially up to 200,000 additional soldiers available? Do you think Kiev could fall this time? Any discussion in this regard is obviously not just highly interesting, but also helps with the algorithm. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. And if you want to help the channel grow, you can recommend the channel and its videos to your friends and acquaintances. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your time, and I'll be back.